Today's lesson is a review on the basic operations with fractions that includes addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. So we'll start with adding and subtracting. When you're adding or subtracting fractions, you need a common denominator. So if you already have a common denominator, adding fractions is simple. You simply, if you have 2/3 plus 1/3, if you go back and think when you were in elementary school and what 2/3 looked like, plus another third, so if we add this one, you have 3/3 basically. So think of thirds as kind of your unit, like 2 inches plus 1 inch. This is 2/3 plus 1/3. We add the numerators together. So now we have a total of 3/3, but they're still thirds. Okay. So we're kind of counting up our thirds. Here's 1, 2, and then another one added. And then we simplify our answer. So in this case, 3/3 is just 1. So you need a common denominator. If you're subtracting, you do something similar. So we'll use 4/5 minus 2/5. You're just going to subtract the numerators instead. So 4/5 take away 2/5 would be, 2/5. If you do not have a common denominator, so for instance, instead of thirds, we have one of them that's 1/3 plus 1/2. Then you need to rewrite your fractions with a common denominator. For addition and subtraction, you must have a common denominator. So in that case, what you need to do is look at your two denominators and think, what could I write them both as? I need a multiple of both 3 and 2, preferably the least multiple they have in common. That's called the LCM, the least common multiple. It'll also be called the least common denominator, because it'll be the denominator. In this case, the least common multiple of 3 and 2 is 6. So I'm going to rewrite both of these with a denominator of 6. And to do that, I can take any fraction, and if I multiply the top and the bottom by the same thing, I'm not changing what that fraction means. So I can do that. I can take 1/3 and I can multiply the top and the bottom both by 2 in order to get that denominator to be 6 like I want. So the bottom will be 6, the top will be 1 times 2, 2. For the 1/2, I still need to make that denominator 6, so I need to multiply it by 3 in order to make it 6. So I'm going to multiply the top and the bottom by 3. And so what I end up with now is two fractions that have the same denominator. So 2/6 plus 3/6 is 5/6, and that's my answer. So as long as that's simplified, you're done. Check to make sure you couldn't simplify that fraction. Okay, subtracting is the same thing. It's just you're subtracting instead of adding, but you still need to get a common denominator. So if I take something like 5/6 minus 1/3, I can subtract these, but I need a common denominator. So I need the least common multiple of 6 and 3. What is a number they both go into? 6 is the smallest one. 6 goes evenly into 6, and 3 goes evenly into 6. And what that means is I don't have to change this first fraction at all. Since it already has a denominator of 6, I don't have to change it. The second one, 1/3, I need to change so that it has a denominator of 6, so I need to multiply the top and the bottom by 2. That'll make 3 times 2 gives me that 6 I need, and what I do on the bottom I have to do to the top as well. So 1 times 2 is my numerator. Now I have two fractions with the common denominator, and I can take 5/6, take away 2/6, and what I'm left with is 3/6, which can be simplified to 1/2. So that is your answer, 1/2. Divide them both by 3. Okay, so that's adding and subtracting. Let's go on to multiplying and dividing. We'll start with multiplying. So when we multiply fractions, it's actually easier than adding and subtracting. You do not need a common denominator. might want to write that down. Pause it if you have to, but write this down. You do not need a common denominator for multiplying or dividing. So if I want to multiply two fractions together, like 2/5 times 1/4, I can just multiply straight across. So if I multiply 2 times 1 and get 2, I can multiply 5 times 4 and get 20, and then simplify. So that becomes 1/10. So with any two fractions you're multiplying, multiply across the top, multiply 6 times 5, so multiplying those two together, 30 on the bottom, and then simplify. When you multiply fractions, you can do what's called cross-canceling. That means instead of multiplying 1 times 2 and 6 times 5 like we did in this problem, we can actually sort of simplify it ahead of time so that we don't have to simplify it at the end. And I'll show you how to do that with this same problem. So you might want to rewrite 1/6 times 2/5. And what we're going to do is when we say cross cancel, we're looking diagonally. We're looking at the numbers that are diagonal from each other, either pair for now. The 2 and the 6, for example. If you could simplify 2/6, if there's something you can divide both of those numbers by, you can sort of simplify it ahead of time. So I can take this 2 and divide it by 2 and get 1. I can take this 6 and divide it by 2 and get 3 and replace that. I can do that this way too if there's something they are both divisible by, but 1 and 5 don't have any common factors, so I can't do any simplifying there. So I can only simplify the 2 and the 6, which I did, and now what I'm doing, I'm going to rewrite it. You won't necessarily have to rewrite this, but now I have 1/3 times 1/5 because I've replaced the 2 and the 6 with 1 and 3. So now I go straight to 1 times 1 is 1, 5 times 3 is 15, and I don't have to worry about simplifying it. You should definitely get in the habit of cross-canceling when you multiply fractions. It'll make things a lot easier, especially when we start getting into algebraic equations that have fractions in them. You want to be able to cross-cancel. It's much more efficient that way. Okay, and lastly is division. Again, we do not need a common denominator to divide fractions. If I want to divide, say, 2/5 divided by 1/4. We convert division to multiplication. There's not a rule per se for dividing fractions. What we do is division is actually, and write this down, you might want to pause it, you're going to multiply by the reciprocal. So the reciprocal being the flip, basically, of the second number. And what that's going to look like for this problem is we're going to keep 2/5 like it is. We're going to convert the division to multiplication, and we're going to take the reciprocal of the second number. Always the second number that you find the reciprocal of. So we kind of like keep change with integers when you're subtracting, but it's division, and we're going to change division to multiply by the reciprocal. So first one stays the same, the sign changes to multiplication, and the reciprocal of the last number. And then you multiply like normal. You can check to see if you can cross cancel, but I can't cancel the 5 and the 4. There's no common factors. Can't cancel the 2 and the 1. No common factors there. So that means I just multiply straight across. 2 times 4 is 8. 5 times 1 is 5. And I can leave my answer like that. It's improper. So for division, you just multiply by the reciprocal. We'll do one more example. So 1/5 divided by 4/15. We'll change division to multiplication. So I'll keep the first one the same. Change to multiplication, multiply, reciprocal. And I'll check to see if I can cross cancel. Once I have multiplication, I can cross cancel. So we're looking diagonally. The 1 and the 4 are diagonal from each other, but they don't have any common factors, so I can't simplify 1 and 4. So I'll leave them alone. the 5 and the 15 do have a common factor. The biggest factor I can divide both of them by is 5. They can both be divided evenly by 5. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to take this 15 and divide it by 5, replace it with a 3. I'm going to take this 5 and divide it by 5 as well, and replace it with a 1. So now what I do is I multiply the 1 times the 3. I get 3 for my numerator. The denominator, I multiply the 1 times the 4, and I get 4 for the denominator. And it's already simplified for me. The answer is 3/4. So that's a quick review of the 4 basic operations with fractions.